Hey, it's Bill Simmons from The Ringer, and this is a podcast called The Rewatchables. We have been doing it really since 2017. It started with how much we love the movie Heat. We decided to structure a whole podcast with categories: most rewatchable scene, who won the movie, Apex Mountain, what age the best. But here's the thing. If you want the full archive, you can hear them only on Spotify, for free, by the way. So make sure to follow The Rewatchables on Spotify. This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day, or hiking, or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details. This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian software like Jira, Confluence, and Trello help power global collaboration for all teams so they can accomplish everything that's impossible alone. Because individually we're great, but together we're so much better. Learn how to unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.com. Atlassian. Tap the banner or visit this episode's page to learn more.
I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com, and joining me in the studio is just a MySpace guy in a Threads world. It's Andy Greenwald!
How dare you? How dare you?
No, I mean, MySpace was your real platform. That was your bullhorn. You
disagree.
know?
Friendster.
Oh, yeah.
I've said this before. I think the best writing I ever did was in testimonials for people on Friendster.
Did you ever write me one?
I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
Too bad that's lost time.
Greenwald, great to see you. What a special show today, because Christopher Storer, the creator, director, guy behind The Bear, is joining us on the show today. So we're going to have a nice long chat with him. Before we get there, there's always stuff happening in the world of pop culture that needs just your very specific eye and voice.
Just mine? What, are you just setting me up today?
I like to be your OC. You know what I mean? I put you in space. I let you make plays, get some yak. But
you're making it sound like you're the T-ball. You know, like you're the T.
No.
For me to hit the ball.
No. I'm Kyle Shanahan.
Oh, so you get it most of the way there, and then
I like
you kind
hats, you know. Like,
okay,
you know.
Work with that.
How you doing, man? It's good to see you. Was your weekend nice?
Lovely, beautiful holiday weekend that was basically like 2 weeks because it was a Tuesday.
Right.
So it still felt like a holiday weekend.
Oh, right. I mean, this past weekend wasn't a holiday, was it?
It felt like one
okay,
still.
just
partly
making sure
because
I didn't skip
everyone
a
in
holiday.
this studio knows that because my kids didn't have camp, so I was.
Oh yeah.
I was OOO. Is that out of office?
Yes.
I was just with them for like 5 days.
Parenting.
It was very fun.
I feel the need to bring the positive vibes today. And Chris will help us because he made the show of the year so far. So until Special Ops Lioness comes out, he has that belt. But I feel the need to be positive because I do feel like we were a little bit depressing on Thursday.
Oh, and I have a few more things coming off of that, as you know.
Okay.
Do you want me to do that before you get positive?
Do you want to continue to be negative and then we go positive?
No, my thing, you're going to love this. This is what's like, there's a zig and there's a zag and then what comes after that?
I don't know.
We need to
there's
iterate.
An Andy.
Yeah, there's me. I want to go one step past that because I do feel like, sometimes the reply guy squawking reaches me in my ivory tower. And I feel like there were two things that were misunderstood.
What's the box that you go into? What's the box they build for phones for like when they're doing like...
The Faraday cage?
Yeah. That's what you live in.
Yeah, but it's more of an ADU.
Just doing 100% parenting.
Just pure liquid parenting. That's when you have a little bit to drink and then parent. I think there were two things that were misunderstood because I did say, I believe, and I don't have the tape. Maybe Kai can run it back. I believe I did say fuck brands.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying that I hate capitalism because I love commercials, both in the sense that they keep our podcast afloat, but also they probably are what will save television.
Sure.
What I feel like people didn't understand is this was what you actually introduced this idea. We are not fans of the Mattel Toy Corporation and everything that they do.
Yeah, right.
Like, I enjoy a product. I don't want the expanded cinematic universe of Thomas's English Muffins.
My sneakers don't need a soul.
No.
Right?
Well, actually, they do.
Well, yeah, okay.
Because that's a part of a shoe.
Nice pun. But like,
you.
I don't need to know the values.
That was the one thing that I wanted to clarify. The other thing is, I think people are like, oh, typical Gen X grumbling that things used to be better. And fair.
Yeah.
You know what you subscribe to when you signed up for this podcast. But my point about people deserving better choices and I think wanting different things than what they're being served, to my mind, is an optimistic point. Because I do think that quality material or more original material could find an audience if the system was set up to support it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather people optimistically be trying to make mass culture entertainment that is good, rather than you're using their problem-solving brains to do that, rather than using the problem-solving brains to turn Yahtzee into a Blumhouse-inspired horror movie.
Sure. I mean, I think that also when you come out of a conversation like the one we had last Thursday, and for anybody who didn't listen and is like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? We basically were bemoaning the state of televised and projected narrative culture.
Yeah.
And it was coming out of an article that was in the New Yorker about Barbie, which apparently people love and is on track to make $95 million and is going to be this giant success story. And it's actually like, that's great. Yeah. That is great. I think the rising tide will lift boats, and I think Oppenheimer will do well.
Does Skipper have a boat set? Is that what you meant?
No, but and then there's also like, as soon as that podcast was basically over, I saw 2 movies in successive nights that wound up being 2 of my favorite movies of the year. I saw Asteroid City on Friday.
Nice.
And I saw How to Blow Up a Pipeline on Saturday, which was truly a mind-blowing movie. Like, just
that's awesome.
How well made it was is just so, it's so accomplished and is so free of so much of the bullshit that comes along with movies right now. So like, there's everywhere you look, there's reasons to be hopeful. I think it was more, there is like, it's hard to like find enough places to look.
There's good stuff. There will be good stuff. There are talented people. The story of the state of the industry is only valid until the next thing comes out. And it can change completely and it can turn on a dime. I just think that through consolidation and through just the state of the economy and things, we're not getting the best choices.
Right.
We're not getting the best opportunities to see things that are good. The Bear is a good example, is a good thing to be talking more about this week, because The Bear is good. It is objectively and subjectively and qualitatively, it is good, and it is a hit. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's significant, and I think it matters. And I don't think all is lost, but I do think that we are losing a lot with the hyper-focus on really telling the narrative story of brands. I get why they're doing it, but we deserve better.
Another thing that will give us a ray of hope, although a little bit bittersweet, is Reservation Dogs, which comes back in early August, I believe.
I think August 1st. Even.
August 1st. And the trailer for that dropped a couple of days ago or last week. But it was also announced that it would be its final season. Sterling Harjo put out a statement where he was just like, I feel like I've said what I wanted to say with this show. And when we wrote the end of season 3, we felt like we had really arrived at the place where the show should end. I feel like we've kind of attacked and broken down pre-ending announcements in every single way, probably coming off of Succession. This was like a major talking point as to whether or not it needed to end there or it had to end there, or what happened in the show because it was ending. But for Reservation Dogs, I completely see where he's coming from. You know, this show could go on for 10 years. It's fine that it's ending after 3. I think he's got the story he wants to tell about this specific group of people, and I can't wait for it to come back.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
I'm furious.
Well, you're a consumer.
I am actually furious about this one. And I mean this with great deal of respect for Sterling Harjo and his creative choices, and everything you're saying is accurate and true. But this is the one that really stuck in my craw to a surprising degree, because, as we've said for the last 2 years, now going on 3 years, this is one of the top 3 best shows on television consistently. It is also the most incredible vessel to tell almost any kind of story, and I adore it for that. And I'm just really frustrated that it's not going to keep going for 10 years. I don't know, but for more years, it did not feel as tied to a narrative anchor as something like Succession, which I think, though it was also bittersweet, we said multiple times that it could start to get a little billionsy if it kept going.
Sure.
And we understand the desire not to keep going. I also think that if you read between the lines of the press statements, that it's clear that Sterling Harjo is going to continue to do what he has been doing even before the larger national spotlight was on him, which is to tell really fascinating, really funny, really compelling native stories in a variety of mediums with a lot of the same crew and community and actors, and sometimes even people playing the same parts. So I have the feeling that the Res Dogs expanded universe will continue to expand. But it was bracing to watch this trailer, and it feels like a different show in the sense that suddenly it is about
the end,
and about these 4 kids finding closure in their emotional arc that spun out from their friend Daniel's death.
I think that it's interesting that we're talking to Chris today, because I've been thinking about this with The Bear a lot, with the sustainability of certain shows.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about narrative sustainability in terms of Succession, but there's also a tonal sustainability. And for The Bear, it's obviously that intensity, which I think they made some inroads into releasing some pressure in various places in the show, like over the course of the second season, although, obviously episode 6 would suggest otherwise. But for the most part, I think that they found some like other notes to play other than all the atoms in my body are exploding at once when this ticket machine is pumping out orders. And you wonder how much longer, not only can they do it physically, but also can those characters be in that state? Because that's not really how life always works. And I think for Reservation Dogs, you could have told a never-ending story about life in this place and loosely about these people. But it seems like the story that Sterling wants to tell is about these kids who are stuck in between childhood and adulthood and dealing with grief sincerely for the first time in their lives in a lot of ways, and how they move on from that. And then this season will be the capstone on that story.
And about staying or going.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things the show does so well is communicate that this is a place where these characters live. This community has been there, and there's a reason why they've been there, and there's these old connections and old relationships, some that have curdled and some that continue to blossom, and that's still a fount for stories for him. But also, he's a filmmaker. And
it's
this
also
is
probably hard because those kids are growing up.
Yes.
So
and have other opportunities, and he doesn't want to stand in the way of that. And this is also relevant to Chris Storer from The Bear, not just because of the FX connection, but Chris and Sterling are both writer-directors and filmmakers. And that is a powerful itch to do different things. So I'm not genuinely angry at him. I hope, and I'm not just saying this because I hope he'll come back on the podcast for a third time. It's also just that, man, I am upset. I love that show and I want more.
So we really did this whole the roof is on fire thing. Sky's falling on Thursday. And you can take what we talked about on Thursday and be like, well, the only things that make these guys happy are these relatively niche arty shows, right? The Bear, Reservation Dogs, whatever. I mean, The Bear is successful, but you know what I mean? I just want to let people know that other things can scratch our itch. Other things can make us happy. And one of those things is Idris Elba negotiating with hijackers on a plane from Dubai to London. And they called the show Hijack.
Great title.
And it stars Idris Elba, and he's a negotiator who happens to be on a plane that gets hijacked, and he negotiates with them. And it's pretty good. It's on Apple TV, by the way.
You kind of feel like the people created the show got 6 months money to do pre-production, and they just bought a copy of Rick Rubin's book. Because they were like, no, we told you the show when you bought it. Idris Elba's on a plane.
Yeah.
The complete lack of anything else going on is pure.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it so much. There are a couple faces that I think I recognize in the ensemble cast, but broadly, I don't know anyone.
There's an Andor guy as the pilot.
That's the guy I recognize. Yeah. Yes, that's Mon Mothma's husband, right?
Yes. No, her ex-boyfriend from childhood, who's also the revolutionary.
Okay, thank you for that. I wondered, but otherwise, nope, don't know. That's fine.
Yeah.
it's what it says on the package. Just open and enjoy. And I only watched one. I think so. They're dropping these every week, and there's 6.
I think there's 6 or 7. Yeah, and there's like an element
4 is
of
coming this week.
real timeness to it. I think, but I found this show to be like basically the Apple version, aka more expensive and higher production value, maybe version of really reliable ABC or Fox thrillers from the earlier part of the century.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, God damn, early 24 is really good. Or like this show on ABC, like not Grays or something like that, but just like it has real network sensibilities and its broad appeal, but also has like a certain like, it looks like that plane set costs a pretty penny, you know?
Yeah, the Apple's budget remains Apple's budget, but it's interesting the way you're saying, because this could be so many different things. This used to be a movie. In fact, this has been a movie multiple times.
Yeah.
Passenger 57 and Executive Decision.
Air Force One. Yeah.
Yes, this has been done. And even that makes sense for television, because what is successful television if not just the sort of like the simulacrum shape of entertainments we've felt before?
Yeah.
Like we know what's coming. It's called Hijack.
Yeah.
So you don't watch the first half hour being like, oh, I hope he gets home to London quickly. You know.
Yeah.
That's fine.
It's so funny because the pilot's just like, clear skies as we fly from Dubai to Heathrow.
There'll be no problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
I also think that to talk about the show kind of does run counter to a lot of what I generally talk about on the podcast, or what I want, because the thing that sets apart a lot of the programs that we love, like Res Dogs, like The Bear, is you can really feel the soul in the machine. There's someone making a decision, or someone with a particular aesthetic that is bringing something, whether it's a song on the soundtrack, or a quirk in the performance, or just a character beat that's like, oh, someone added that and fought to keep it in there. There's none of that here that I can tell whatsoever, and I'm not mad about it.
Except for one thing.
Well, because I did want to point out that like the opening theme and like the credits thing, I feel like AI is already in Hollywood, because I just can't believe anyone was like, that song rules.
Well, it's just like a
I mean?
slow jazz ballad, right?
Well, no, when it starts, there's a little bit of like R&B playing, but I mean the Hijack theme song, which is a real song. I'm just like, so all the filmmakers got together with Apple's budget and they were like, nailed it. This is just middle of the road thing is what we want. But that's fine. I mean, the people behind it aren't newbies. Like this guy, Jim Field Smith, who directed it and is the creative partners with George Kay, who wrote it. He made a show I loved a few years ago called The Wrong Mans that James Corden made before he started his late night show. They've worked on a lot of they're professionals.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you had a quirk that you wanted to point out.
It's not really a quirk. It's just a one of one. It's Idris Elba. It's like,
That's right.
It is, we talk so much about stardom, especially on the big picture, where we're like trying to like basically like catalog what is it that makes Tom Cruise running different than this person running, or what is it that makes Julia Roberts laughing different than this person laughing, or what is it that this person has that 99.9% of the people in the world don't have.
Yep.
And it's really, really, really difficult to describe. If you could describe it, then you could reverse engineer it, right? But you could take 1,000 different actors and put them in this role, and it would be maybe fine, but it wouldn't have been as good. It wouldn't have been as, why is Idris Elba walking so slow as he approaches the gate?
Yeah.
Like, why does he seem this? Why does he seem that? When he gets up, like, he seems like this. And he has now kind of grown into, I think he's had this for a while, but he has definitely, like, grown into his, like, middle-aged looks and his haggardness a little bit more, because he was, I've read a couple of interviews with him where he's just like, I've aged out of Bond, and also that whole discourse left a really bad taste in my mouth. But he's like, I don't want to do that. But he kind of has a later middle-aged, I'm tired vibe that I think really, really works for him.
It's a Harrison Ford thing. It's a Liam Neeson thing. Those guys are obviously much older, but the getting too old for this shit.
Yeah,
but by the way, I can still handle this shit.
A little bit of bags on the eyes, a little bit of like moving slower than I used to.
Did you Google how old he was when you watched the show? I did.
How old?
How old do you think? What's your guess?
54.
50 years young. So he was 49 when he filmed this. So he's not that much older than your humble narrators.
I didn't say that we weren't. Maybe that's what I'm responding to, is I finally feel seen on screen.
That's what I bring when I'm on a plane. That's my energy too.
I got to say though, I will pretty much watch anything set in an airport or an airplane
I
because
wanted to give
there
you a
really
chance to
may
say
be
this.
no other environment that I have more opinions about. So just the first half hour of this show is essentially boarding.
Mhm.
And you might think that that would be boring. Listener, I found that to be the most fascinating half hour of television I've seen this year, where it's just like, interesting. We're having a little debate about whether overhead baggage compartments are the property of the community or the individual.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Also,
Whether or not people with children matter more than people without.
This will surprise no one that, and I don't think this is really a spoiler, but one of the things that happens early on is as you mentioned, Idris is a very casual flyer. No luggage, just saunters onto the plane in the last possible second. And then one of his fellow passengers, who I'm sure is just another innocent person on the plane, doesn't make it in time.
Yeah.
Arrives just as this plane has boarded whatever.
It's literally like
goes
a
across.
fake rope that she puts up. And she's like, I've put the rope up. I'm
Yes.
sorry, sir.
And Idris is like, come on, who's it going to harm? And you're like, thank you, McBain. But it will surprise no one to hear that if I had been in that situation, I would have been like, ma'am, rules are rules. They are here for a reason.
Oh, you don't like anybody boarding late like that? I don't know about you. I'm a real like hovering around the gate. I'm ready to get on.
I cosplay as a military person to get on first.
Yeah.
Like I do not dally. I want everything run shipshape.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want everyone following all the rules.
Because
at all
if the
times.
plane somehow gets delayed on the ground, not that would ever happen in the United States of
definitely
America.
not.
It's not going to like make me feel more or less anxious because I was on the plane for an extra 20 minutes because I lined up like as soon as I could. But if I get on the plane last and, you know, I'm stepping over people, the overhead bins are all taken, yada, yada. Like I'm pretty uptight.
Also, everyone's coming up to you, tears in their eyes. Sir, your appearance on the Bill Simmons podcast last week was...
Sir. I wanted to tell everybody that I love The Idol, but I was scared until I heard
you showed leadership. I also know that for narrative purposes, when you have a large airplane and there's over 200 people on it, you cannot humanize everyone, and the people you humanize tend to be very broad strokes.
If maybe Hijack season 3, we just learn more about everybody.
The tailies, that worked out great.
Exactly.
I think, but the reason I say that is because it excuses the very broad strokes people that it does show, like the kind of the harried mom or the whatever. It also does excuse the fact that I don't care how many stock footage shots you have of 3 people being a little concerned about the guns waving around. Like, this is an inaccurate representation of people in 2023 flying and then being hijacked.
Right.
It would not be that chill.
It's not that it's chill. Well, first of all, personally, I was a little bit surprised because I was like, from my experience in Air Force One and other movies.
From your experience in the Air Force.
Guns on a plane are really nerve-wracking because if one bullet hits a window, the entire thing depressurizes.
That's the only reason.
So the idea that they've all got guns is pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah. I agree with that. Do you think...
But then again, I don't really know how you take over a plane, like strong language. You know what I mean? Like,
well, you wouldn't be a hijacker. I would never suggest that. But there are a couple tough boys.
I would just be like, nobody wants to go to jail tonight, right?
I don't... See, that's my question. I thought that you would be like, we rush them from behind.
No, I'm not doing that.
That wouldn't be you?
No, I would probably try to talk them out of it. I'd be like, what do you guys, whiteboard?
So you're like...
Dream big, blue sky. What do you guys need?
You're like Ennis in Die Hard. Like just in word and deed.
Hans, Bobby.
You're just ingratiating yourself to the people. I would say
I would be lying about all my close personal relationships with people. Like the pilot is a bud. He's a bro. Okay. You want to go play?
If it had been,
we can go play Riv when we land in Los Angeles. I promise.
If it had been a bumpy ascent, I don't think there would be any visual difference in me. Like whether it's just like a little turbulence then a hijacking, I think I would be the same.
That's how you feel?
I'd be the same guy.
Yeah.
But look, all of this is to say, this is fine. Do this. Like, make stuff like this. This is fine.
Yeah.
There should be a middle brow, like, that is entertaining, that ticks boxes. I'm enjoying it.
Unless you think Apple is just churning out mass entertainment for the biggest common denominator. You also saw another show that is only made for you.
Yeah, and this is really, this wasn't to call you out, but this is all like to put you on the spot because I don't think you've taken the plunge either into the drops of God.
No.
But
the only drops of God I recognize are the righteous gemstones.
Fair. And I'm behind, so I'm going to catch up on that. Instead of catching up, I'm too behind. I watched this show that we talked about on the podcast 6 months ago, where I was like, "Thank you, Hollywood."
Wait,
for
did you see
making
the third
one for
episode
me.
of Gemstones?
No,
Did you
I've
see
only seen the first
Goggins?
two.
Okay.
I've not seen them. And I mentioned it, and then I don't know. It was almost. I felt like almost self-conscious that there was a show that was just for me. This is, and I didn't watch it, and now I have, and I'm going to continue. I'm just putting you on alert.
Okay.
I'm going to watch the show. This is an Apple. It's an international co-production. It is based on a Japanese manga.
Mm.
It is a French-Japanese co-pro. And it is about, I wish I could just bottle your face right now and just share it with
I
our
know what
listeners.
it's about. I'm just letting you do your bit.
But no, it's about the daughter of the world's greatest wine expert and connoisseur, who's a Frenchman. She's a French woman. And he, sort of traumatized her in childhood by making her a super taster and like his strong opinions about things. And he abandoned the family, went to Tokyo, wrote all these books, amassed the world's greatest collection of wine, and taught.
He made her a super taster,
Mhm.
had very strong opinions,
Yes.
and then abandoned her and moved to Tokyo.
So are you suggesting this is a potential path for me if camp doesn't start again soon?
That's it.
Frankly, I have no follow-up. Guilty. And in Tokyo, he had like a protege, a student, a young Japanese man who's also, I guess, an exceptional taster of wine. And the father passes away. And then his will is a taste test, basically, like challenging his daughter, with whom he had no contact, and this young Japanese man to basically identify. They have 2 months to identify one wine.
That's my biggest regret about not having kids.
It's just fucking with them from the afterlife.
For not having a will and just being like, guess what, motherfuckers, Squid Game time. You know what I mean?
Well, you could still do it with your friends.
Yeah, but they're not going to participate. You're going to be like, let's say I die at like 64.
Okay.
Okay. You're not going to, at 64, are you going to do Squid Game to get like my collection of Larry McMurtry novels?
I could be 65 at that point.
It's true.
So no, and Idris Elba will only be 69 and he'll still be making these movies. So he'll win. That's how you do it. You would have it be like, to you, my friend Andy, my other friend Sean Fennessy, and you, Idris Elba.
Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Please.
To you, I leave.
Compete amongst yourselves.
All the Google Docs of my preparation for the rewatch.
All the remaining Nicorette lozenges in my possession. Anyway, the first episode is kind of humorless, but also it's about wine tasting in Tokyo, so I'm in. And thank you, Apple, for making these things.
There you go.
What a great brand.
Still a brand-friendly guy over there.
What a great brand. I just, you know me, like I wish that there was, it's so stratified that like, would it be fun to see a slightly more creative attempt to make a hijack with a little more humor or something, or a drops of God with a little self-awareness? Sure, those would be great.
Could there be a little bit more Squid Game in Drops of God?
I think there might be some.
Oh, yeah?
Well, the thing that I didn't mention that the pilot is that the daughter, as a child, like he was doing the Top Chef quickfire thing where like blindfolds her and then it's just like gives her a little taste of things and she's like melon but French, like moss, like he's feeding his daughter moss.
Okay.
Which seems cool. And but then as an adult, not only does she not drink, if she tastes alcohol, she has like a synesthesia, like she explodes in color and her nose starts bleeding. Really? Yeah. It's pretty hype.
Okay. You're talking me into it.
Yeah, until I said that her nose starts bleeding, you were uninterested.
I think this will be a show that I check out.
It also does have, you mentioned Squid Game, that one of my favorite genres is interesting and worthwhile shows filming in Asia that also need to find actors who can speak English. Because this show is in 3 languages, but a lot of it is in English because that's the common language.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to this guy
like
who might be
Vice too.
This one dude might be a genius actor in his native Italian, and he's like the dad's friend who picks her up from the airport, but he has to do all of his acting in English with this French woman, and he was your father, but he was a good friend. Now, please enjoy this Spanish Rioja.
Should we break here and have Chris come on?
Kai, how long have we been talking? Because I think this is...
we're about to hit 30.
Frankly, that So this is what a podcast could be.
This is
right?
what it's all about.
We watched some
it's
television.
The internal shot clock.
That was amazing, first of all. But also, we've watched some television.
Uh-huh.
We did a little banter. We talked to a couple, state of the industry stuff, and done in 30.
Yeah.
Maybe, is this what we should have been doing the whole time?
What do you think we usually do?
70?
No, I know. But then he's going to come in and he'll talk for 40 minutes and it will be 70.
We think he's going to talk for 40.
Yeah. What if he's just like, I'm in and out? This is the junket.
It's possible.
Yeah. All right. Christopher Storer is up next.
It's going to be exciting.
This episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. New Year's resolutions are fun the first couple of weeks. Then you kind of maybe conveniently forget about them halfway through January. No shame. It happens to us all. But this year I have a foolproof plan, at least when it comes to saving money. Just switch to Mint Mobile and you're done. Goal accomplished, because for a limited time, their wireless plans are $15 a month when you buy a 3-month plan. The great thing about Mint Mobile is there's no jaw-dropping monthly bills or unexpected overages, and all plans come with unlimited talk and text. Get this new customer offer today at mintmobile.com/watch. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, now streaming only on Netflix.
TaxAct knows you don't look forward to taxes. TaxAct doesn't even look forward to taxes, and TaxAct is a tax software company. It's basically TaxAct's whole thing. If TaxAct did things over, maybe TaxAct would end up teaching kindergarten or leading fly fishing tours. But that's a different story for a different ad. So why don't we just agree that taxes aren't fun, but you still have to do them? TaxAct's filing software can help you do that. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Love the way you look this wedding season at Men's Warehouse. With the range of sizes from extra small to big and tall. Explore top styles at prices for any budget, including designer suit and tux rentals starting at just $159. With over 600 locations, in-store consultations, and easy online booking, there's a reason why couples choose Men's Warehouse to find their perfect fit. Men's Warehouse. Love the way you look.
Andy and I are so happy to be joined by Chris Storer, the creator of The Bear, director of many of the episodes. He also reinvented the Scott Lick remix of REM's Strange Currencies as he cracks open
an
a
ice
seltzer.
cold.
No, make yourself comfortable,
Sorry,
refresh
guys.
yourself.
Listen, we like your TV show, but you saved REM. So you are very welcome in the studio.
That's very, very nice. Thanks for having me, guys. This is great. That
We-
Scott Litt remix, though, is awesome.
It's
really
a
good.
real heads no kind of cut. You know what I mean? We're going to get into the music of the show, but Andy, you wanted to start.
Yeah, we wanted to talk, obviously we want to talk about season 2 of The Bear, which we adored, but I kind of wanted to start by going backwards a bit because the impression that we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that the production, post-production, and release of season 1 was kind of like what Carmi and the crew just went through, in the sense that you had an almost impossible deadline, but you made it, and then it was an enormous success. And I kind of wonder if your issue a year ago when all this was going down wasn't too dissimilar from what season 3 of the show might bring, in that like you did it once and how the hell are you going to do it again? So it's July, you did do it again. Season 2 is incredible.
Thanks. Man.
Going back to that time a year and a half ago or so, how did you approach the second season of the show? Because you had the added weight of expectations, and I don't think you had any extra time. They still wanted you to hit like an old-fashioned TV show. They wanted you to be on the air again. So how were you so prepared to make the show that you ended up making?
The whole thing's pretty wild because I think the one plus of all of it was that FX very smartly kind of made us flesh out what the world sort of was.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think in any show that you're starting off, that's a key step. But I think Joanna and I found that we were able to put together what we thought were like, oh, this is probably what 1, 2, and 3 would look like as like a roadmap of where we were going. And it's funny because when we were shooting the pilot, I think everyone at FX was like, this is kind of nuts, but we see that it's cool and you're sort of thrown into this world. And we shot that, I think, in the summer of 2021. So it was still like COVID was still really in the mix. And I think it was interesting because I think on season 2, we were sort of like, oh, that was the first time we saw that person with their mask off or got to really like hang out with them because that bubble was obviously pretty protective. And I think when we were making it, it felt fun and alive. And like Maddie and I would always say, like, we think this is really cool, but I think we had both been a part of shows or movies that we really loved and no one saw.
This is Maddie Matheson.
Yeah. And I think we were like, I do think somebody will find this and think it's cool. And I think once we finally got picked up, and I think, let's see, we started shooting February 28th of 2022, and then it was on June 23rd.
So that's the thing that I feel like people cannot comprehend.
Well, you know what's weird, man, is that it was actually kind of the best thing that happened because it just removes second guessing, and it does feel like you're running a restaurant.
Yeah.
But it also put a lot of pressure, I think, on our cast to really like step up. And I think, you know, you asked like, how's it feel like going with expectations and then everything? And it's like, I genuinely feel like I wish I could take more credit. I think 95% of what people like about the show is the chemistry with the cast. And I think it's because they are such wonderful. I mean, they're the best, dude. And I love them all so much. And I think even casting it was a trip because, you know, a majority of them were my dear friends in real life. So it was like, I love them and they kind of love each other. So I feel like you'll feel that on screen a little bit.
So you knew a lot of the cast.
I think it was interesting. The first 2 people that were like cast were Io and Lionel. And like Jeremy was always we always wanted Jeremy, but it was that weird period where he was coming off Shameless and we didn't know if that was going to go again.
Yeah, I remember talking to him after season 1. He was like, I didn't know if I wanted to do another show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting to think about that. He spent, 13 seasons on a show, which now seems unheard of. So when we finally got that, it was like those 3 were together, and like Liza, my girlfriend, had worked with previously. And so like all these things dialed. Like the true X factor was Eben. Like Richie was the hardest person to cast because it's so specific. And I'll never forget, like we did a chemistry read with Eben and Jeremy. And I think Eben was in the middle of shooting Andor, but like couldn't talk about what he was doing.
But he had some cool tattoos.
Well, no, he looked. I mean, it was so interesting.
Greedo's blaster in his tote bag.
Yeah, like the first time I saw Eben do this, he was in some sort of like shanty in a part of the world that was not immediately identifiable.
Yeah, Burbank.
No, but like literally like with like mountains behind him.
Yeah,
and we were like, where? And I'm like, this dude is inherently the guy, like already, like he's got it. And then their chemistry was just great, but he was also wearing like a tank top and just came at it 100 miles per hour. And it sort of made Jeremy bounce back at him, and they instantly felt like brothers. So it was a real trip to do that. And then I think when we were shooting it, the schedule really informed, I think, the fast pace of the show.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that was really great, like our crew also doesn't get enough credit for being incredible. Like they really are. I mean, everyone from our camera department to our art department to our makeup, props, everybody. And we were able to keep the same schedule every day, which was essentially like shoot all the scenes from like 7 a.m. to 3:30. And then 3:30 to 5:30 was like the food inserts, which is always kind of the thing that sucks. You know, like and it's amazing to have like my sister and Maddie on hand to sort of handle that.
And
with
they
the
like
prop
do
scene.
the omelet and do the chips and stuff like that.
Io did the omelet.
Okay, wow,
and that was
amazing.
like pretty cool because I think she worked really hard on it. It's like, you know, it's like sort of there's a lot of loving references to all of our chef friends in the show, and that one in particular was kind of like a riff on Ludo's omelet at Petit Trois, and who, you know, was great to my sister and
your sister Courtney, who's a great cook in her own right and chef at John and Vinny's, and
one of our producers. Yeah, and I think she was able to sort of be like, okay, we wanted to do this, and what's, you know, how would Sydney sort of personalize that? And it's one thing to make that like when you're in my sister's kitchen, but then when there's like 100 crew people like looking at you, so I had a lot of pressure on her. She nailed it, dude.
So Andy was asking you about expectations, and I have something that kind of goes along with that, which is really about when a TV show goes from being, you know, something in your head and something that's shared among the crew and cast that you're making it to almost like a kind of more public ownership. Yeah. And I've compared The Bear a couple of times to Friday Night Lights.
That's cool, man.
Not only in some of the tonal stuff and maybe even some of the filmmaking stuff, but like especially like the way in which I notice people talk about the characters and feel protective of the characters and start to develop like almost like personal relationships with some of the characters. But with that comes, they're still characters.
Yeah.
You still want to put them through certain things, and they can't just be preserved and always internet boyfriend for everybody. But like, did you have any moments in the making of or the writing of 2 where you were starting to become aware of like, this is what people think of Richie or Sydney or Carmi?
Not once.
Okay.
And I think it's because, again, we had, like, since we sort of have season 1, 2, and 3 figured out, it was really cool to not have to answer any of that stuff, really, and I think, again, it just goes back to, I mean, Andy, in production, like, you just get beat up all day. Everyone's just, like, your time is always just, you're obsessed with time. So it's like any of that stuff sort of just gets covered in everything else that has to happen in the day.
If you had more time, maybe then the doubt would start to creep.
I think so. Or
if the season had been delayed longer.
Less doubt, but more like, Jeremy said this thing that was really interesting is in the aftermath when you're like promoting it, the cool thing about the show, like love or hate it, like people do feel attached to certain aspects of it, and I think take certain things away from performances that maybe the actors weren't even aware of. Like Jeremy was like, man, I've been talking about it so much, I don't even remember what my first instincts of the character were. And I think it's one of the cool things, again, what I say about like 95% of it is the cast. It's like they're bringing a lot of their own personality to it, and I think it just speaks to how incredible they are that you just get attached to it. And the Friday Night Lights comparison is awesome. I love that show so much, man.
But there's also, and clearly you had committed to this ahead of time, so you didn't want to rethink it, but it's a radically different show in the second season in some crucial ways. I mean, it goes from being sort of knock around, blue collar to white linen, or at least white linen aspirational, in terms of the construct of what they're doing. And you have to have some confidence, right, in the overall story, but also I guess the question in there is, you were committed to a radical change in the show from season 1 to season 2 before you even went into production on season 1. How did you keep perspective on what you needed to hold on to? Like, what are your North Stars in terms of what makes the bear, even as the restaurant itself changes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was also like me just wanting to be honest to why I made it in the first place, and I think it's, because to me, it's less about a restaurant and more about sort of these people. And I knew we were going to be slower to start and you were going to open up the world and get to know these people. But I also kept thinking like, dude, if it's just people screaming at each other, you're going to get sick of that shit.
Yeah.
Like truly selfishly. Like I was like, I don't know if I want to like shoot scenes like that all day long. And it's like, there's so many references to other filmmakers I love that we were sort of like, it's cool to change it up a little bit and like let these people sort of play around and get to know them. But at the same time, like we know it's going to get crazier again at some point. And I think like you might maybe enjoy it a little bit more because you haven't been bludgeoned with people, screaming for 10 more episodes.
Yeah, I saw you talking about like the Hornsby song in the opening episode being like, it's okay, chill out. It's gonna be like we're gonna take it like down like 5 degrees here.
Totally. And I also think that's true of like not just restaurants, but a lot of jobs. Like it goes from chaos to not chaos. And I think in season 2, because they're building a restaurant, it sort of felt natural to let them chill out a little bit. And I think, that Hornsby song is great, dude. I mean, it's so funny because it was like, so much of the show obviously is based on, friendships I made at Mr. Beef and my buddy Chris Zucchero. And I remember, being, I don't like 5 years old or something and hearing about Backdraft filming in Chicago. And Backdraft always has like such a specific place in my heart. And there was this great montage that has that Bruce Hornsby song on it. Like it's really sort of lovely in the middle of this movie of them sort of driving around Chicago.
That's like they're doing, it's like all they're like, they're firefighting and it's just like a beautiful summer in Chicago.
Yeah.
I watched a live performance of that after the show came out. I was like, I have not thought about Bruce Hornsby a lot.
I think about a live performance of Backdraft.
I went
during the strike, we're all trying to make ends meet. And
Russell and Billy Baldwin
dinner theater.
Back together.
It gets kind of exciting. But it's a Bruce Hornsby in the Range concert from like 1990. And it starts
was it at?
I think it's in Chicago.
That's awesome.
I'm not sure, but it's like it starts and it's Hornsby and I'm familiar with him. And I'm like, I wonder what Bruce Hornsby's band looked like. And it pans right. And it's like, it's a time in America where dudes were like just way older.
Very specific, yeah.
They're
like 40, but they look 70.
They're 40, but they look like they
90s.
just definitely have
awesome.
smoked like 700 Benson and Hedges that day.
That's
and they're just like the session dudes who are playing with them are just amazing.
I also blew Chris's mind. I was like, have you been keeping up with Hornsby? He's been making some pretty relevant records recently.
Yeah, man.
He's
He's
fucking
still
sending
driving
me like late period Hornsby songs.
Yeah, Hornsby has a duet with James Mercer from the It's good. Look,
he still got it.
We'll circle back.
Hornsby still got it.
Still got it.
End of podcast.
100%.
there's an interesting dynamic that happens with long-running TV shows, and it speaks to what Chris was saying about people's parasocial relationship to the characters, which is we love these people. And I think one of the things that makes The Bear so special is that it's clear that you love them also, you and Joanna and the rest of your creative team. Yeah. You love them as actors and you love them as characters. Yeah. How do you consider your responsibility towards them when you're crafting a season like season 2 where you want them to win? Yeah. And there are moments that are, frankly, why we watch television, like when Tina smiles when Sydney offers her the job, and it's also why you cast an actress like Liza Colon-Zayas, because she's in the background and she can give you that smile and do so much more. But so just in terms of that balancing act of you want to give them wins, but it's also a dramatic TV show with very high stakes. What's your setting on that?
It's interesting. Me, Coco, and Maddie always have this thing that we talk about a lot, which is like winning is losing a lot of the times. Yeah. And it's hyper specific to restaurants, which is like one service will be great. The next day can be fucked. Can I swear? I'm so sorry.
Yes. Please. In fact, you're encouraged.
No, but like the next day it'll just be fucked. And it's like you sort of see that in the building of the restaurant because, like the construction and sort of building of any business can be relatively boring. But I think when you know how much stock these people have in it, even like the smallest victories kind of end up being these gigantic game changers. Like, for example, like I remember talking to a lot of my friends that were opening new restaurants or something, and they were always saying like fire suppression and getting the gas on is always like the heartbreaker.
I said when we were doing our season breakdown, I was like 8 is like a shadow end of the season. Because for them, that's when their lives flash before their eyes, and it's like, then the hard part happens. But there's like a nice version of this where it's like, we passed the test, the end of the season.
Totally. And I think it's interesting too, because at that episode, you end like with fire and then we end the season with like cold. And it's sort of back to this like fight, flight. And then the third response of stress, which is freeze, which I think is extremely relatable to a lot of people. But I think when you put that in the scope of trying to operate a new business and be a leader to whatever your skill set is, like the smallest victories are everything, man, because the biggest victories are often the ones that you lose, I think. And I think that's sort of a little bit of the sort of the outline we always follow when we're putting together a season.
The person who really has to hold the L in this second season is Carmi, right? Like the character is the one that even, you get Richie's sort of redemptive moments when he's staging, you get Sydney kind of coming to this sort of point of understanding with her father. All these characters kind of find themselves in a new, maybe like place that they've been longing to be. And then he's fucking locked in a freezer, unable to experience joy and now single again. Or, and just at least obviously it has this like terrible moment with Claire. That's got to be an interesting conversation with Jeremy because it's like, you don't get like Carmi doesn't get to come in and do the carousel speech in Mad Men. Like, you know what I mean? He doesn't get to come in and be like, tonight I cooked my ass off and everybody saw I was the best in the world. But like, he seems like the kind of actor who embraces that. But you would have to have that because there might be other people out there who'd be like, can I do something really cool at the end of the season? Like everybody else gets to, like, can I drive around a love story? Like,
no, it's a great point. Cause I also think like, I should also say like Jeremy's an incredibly gracious actor who like, even when I like told him, I think this is what's going to happen. He's like, that's so fucking cool. Because also you get to know everybody else. But I do think it is true of a lot of people. It's definitely something I suffer with where you're just like, I'm going to freeze and can't accept any form of joy. I can't, like, this is like, when Joanna and I were sort of road mapping like 1 into 2 into 3, like she was like, when was the last time you had like fun? And I was sort of like, whoa. Like it was one of those moments that I was like, and I am grateful and I love my job in my life very much. But like I was like, I don't
college.
Well, no, but it is interesting because you're sort of
class on fun. I audited it.
No, really. But it is this thing where you're sort of like, well, I have a great time at work and I love everybody. But there is that moment when, you're on location, you get home and your place is all of a sudden very quiet. Yeah. And, your significant other isn't there and you're sort of out of your routine. And it's like one of the first things we see in episode 1, 2, is like Jeremy going home to quiet. And I think that's the moment that sort of says a lot about where he is in his life, especially someone that grew up knowing chaos is the norm. So when you have this girl come into your life that sort of represents maybe even like hope and something about patience and acceptance and like kindness, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
I think one of the most obvious challenges that you face in making the show broadly, but specifically the second season, I think is sort of convincing the world that fine dining is worthwhile, even in this economy, that there's a reason for doing this. And I think the brilliant way that you choose to communicate that is why these specific characters need that, right? They need that order and chaos. And I think that's an interesting through line for the show's project as a whole, which is it is deeply, I guess I keep using the word credulous, of the idea that you can find yourself through work, through repetition, through self-respect, and these sort of overarching concepts that people who successfully navigate kitchens preach. I mean, is that a fair assessment?
100%, man. I mean, look, I'm like a hyper anxious person. Like anxiety is a real thing in depression that I battle with all the time. And I think one of the things that I have found that sort of helps at times is routine. And I think that is true of a lot of creative people I know. And I think because the first season of the show was more intense and about this guy trying to figure out his life, and season 2, we sort of get into like what creativity means to people and what teamwork means to people. And like, I don't know that a Michelin rated restaurant is better than like, I think that's like a conversation I don't have the answer to, but I do think there is something about the value of teamwork and being pushed and finding yourself creatively and how that can lead to better communication in your own life. Like, I think you were asking about process earlier, like, it sounds like bullshit, but like I am so grateful for this show, man. Like it's like in terms of the communication with my partners and like we have a good time, man. Like we're all considerate of each other, and like it does feel like a family thing. And I know that it's not necessarily always that way. So I think, when you were saying like, how do we react to season 1? I think the thing we really did was sort of like, all right, aside from what people thought of it, believe me, like you can go on Twitter, enough people fucking hate it, that it's all good. But I do think when you look back at like, well, what did we do that was right? And, there were some, like, whether it was like setting up the prop department and art department, or how they pushed certain ideas, or, how Maddie and Coco furthered the story through the food. Like we just locked in on some things that we thought were sort of kind of special. And we were like, well, that could lend itself a little bit more to season 2.
I was curious whether or not, this second seasons of shows, especially shows that are like relatively successful or successful in any way, tend to follow this idea that you take this core group of people and then you necessarily, for narrative purposes, have to separate them. They have to go on like these individual journeys and then bring them back together in some way, which this show does do. But I also noticed that there was a little bit of a departure filmmaking-wise in various episodes. Specifically, I would say Pop had like a kind of almost Cameron Crowe feel. And obviously the Richie episode, like a lot of people have talked about like the Michael Manniness of it. And, so as a filmmaker and as somebody who's probably overseeing like the visual aspect of this show, was it important for you to have like almost like the filmmaking journey be different than the first season and go off and try other things and then come back to the bear in those last 2 episodes?
I think so. But I also think it was more, if we were doing a lot of the same it's kind of the same as the yelling thing. Like I was like, if we were doing some of the same camera stuff, like I think it might get repetitive and ultra boring. But also like storytelling wise, I kept thinking like, they're in a little bit of a brighter spot. So like, Andrew Wade, our DP, and Chris Dame and Gary Maloof, our camera operator, they really, and Jeremy Long, our one of our gaffers, like they really built sort of a brighter space. So like the bear is inherently going to be a little bit of a brighter space, but also, what we would find, like I wish I could tell you that it was like all well thought out in advance, but it really kind of comes from character. Like episode 7, for example, like we had so much fun thinking that like Eben or Richie was obsessed with Ridley Scott and Michael Mann. Yeah. So we were like, we're going to lend some of that to that episode. And then we have like, the wonderful Molly Gordon join us this year. And I think like the first time that I saw her and Jeremy together, it was like, okay, we're going to have a 100 millimeter lens and that's it. And like, we're just going to let these like, both of their eyes are so sharp and hopeful and full of promise. It's like, let's just let them look at each other and we don't have to overcover it. But I think we also knew that because Joanna, like Pop is one of my favorite episodes of this season. I think Joanna just like killed that thing because I feel like it's been a while since we've seen just like an old, kind of like an older romantic comedy that's sort of and by the way, talking about music, the one music cue that no one's picked up on, Claire and Carm, when they're in the kitchen toward the end of the party, we got Ira Newborn's Weird Science score that's playing like very, very quietly in the background, because it's like Joanna had that great idea too, that the party should sort of just feel like it's a representation of childhood, and there's like Superdog all over the place. And
I like the idea of somebody at Disney who's like in the accounting department being like, okay.
Well, I mean, by the way, I think like FX has just been incredible partners with that stuff. They're like, all right, man, you want a Hornsby song? Like, I get it, but I think like the same goes for like episode 3, which Joanna directed, that really was about creativity. Yeah. And, her and Io got to run around Chicago, and so many of our restaurant friends like Donnie Medea and everybody at Kasama really helped us sort of inform what that creative process is like. And then, for episode 4, Rami directed it. Yeah. And Newport Berra, who shot our pilot, came back, and we knew it would have a different look. And I think it's because Joanna and I are usually directing, and Rami and I have worked together so much in the past, that it was like, you guys do, like, just make this its own thing. Because we also know there's going to be a bomb in episode 6 that's going to be kind of nutty. So
I think we want to talk about 6 and 7, but I did want to ask you just 2 questions about casting. You sort of alluded to it before. Part of it is something you've already said, which I hadn't realized, that you had relationships with some of the actors. Yeah. One thing that I feel is kind of you can make this blanket statement, just like filmmakers broadly love actors. But I feel like there's some who really fucking love actors. And I get that sense from your show. And the reason I say that is not just because you cast so well, but you and your collaborators seem to just see into the actor's soul and think about what they excel at, what particular ineffable thing they bring, and put them in positions to succeed. And I can't help but always think of Eben when I consider that, because in his performance, I see decades of never quite being the guy, even though, we've had him on the podcast. He's a lovely person, but he brings that to it. And I can't help but think about it when you have him share the screen with Olivia Colman, who is world-class actor, and she's there doing one scene and she's doing it with him, and that guy can fucking hang. Yeah. And you're giving him the opportunity to do it, and he shows up on center court at Wimbledon to have that match. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, man, because I really am in awe of them, dude. And I think, the way we shoot our show, it's like 2 or 3 takes for the most part, because I think we like it to feel nervous, and especially sometimes with the cooking stuff, like take 4 almost feels a little too
they're almost dialed. Too good at it. Yeah.
But I think this thing, and again, like it's kind of the film school of season 2, which is like you really feel some of the actors unlock each other or take them to the next level. Like, for example, when early on I was like, Io, I think we're going to see your dad this year. And I was like, and I was thinking before I could even say it, she was like Robert Townsend. And I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Not only because Robert Townsend rules, but it's like, Io and him had a friendship, but also like, I love directing comedy specials. Like, it's something that I really like doing a lot. And Robert was always someone I really admired. Like, he made Raw, but he also made Meteor Man and the 5 Heartbeats. And when I was like, I don't know if he'll do it, and when we talked to him about it, and we were lucky enough to have him, like, him and Io just unlock something in each other, man. Where you're like, you guys feel like you've known each other forever. And I think the same is true of Molly and Jeremy, but also Eben and Bernthal, dude. Like, I mean, like Eben obviously is a world-class actor, but like, because him and Johnny have had this history and are dear friends in real life, there's like something about the two of them that they just keep going
you can't
to that.
Fake it.
Yeah, I mean,
no, there's stuff like he looks at Bernthal in those scenes where he's like, he wants his like approval, but it's never written. It's just like him 100%. Like, hey man, did you hear my joke? Like, kind of like, it's so good.
Yeah. And then I also think you see like Will Poulter and Lionel have this chemistry that's out of control. And speaking to the Olivia thing was really interesting, because I think when we were talking about that episode, like, you're going to see who the chef is eventually at the end. And, she's sort of based on sort of like, like a Thomas Keller or someone that's like bases themselves off routine and has gotten their ass kicked in the industry a little bit and come back. And we kept thinking like, man, there's something so cool. Not only that if it the reveal that it's a woman and she sort of looks like Nancy Silverton and kind of has like a great vibe, but a British woman, we were like, man, if Olivia Colman would do it, we'd really hammer that thing home. And we were lucky to get her. And I think
how much time did you have with her?
So she's like the coolest person on the face of the earth. I mean, like, it's so weird because you never know what you're. And I have to say, like, every guest actor that came in this year was like the shit, dude.
Yeah,
like truly, like working for scale. Like, no one got paid. Like, came in for 3 days at a time. we kicked the shit out of them, and it was the most fun. And I think Olivia flew from London for 12 hours, and we shot her out in about 2.5 hours, and then she went home. Yeah, but I mean, it was. But I think for newcomers to the set, they're sort of, at first they're kind of like, this is kind of wild, and then they're like, oh, this is so fun and so cool.
Well, that's a perfect segue to the other question, which was, one of the things that the show has done so well is bring people into the world who feel like they've always been in the world. And obviously part of that is people that you knew would fit in. Part of that is casting people who might be unknown to the larger public, so that when we begin to know them, we know them for this part. So Molly Gordon's a great example where I think I've seen her in things, but I don't know her. And she looks, she's lovely to look at, but she also looks like she could be in Chicago. It's plausible.
Right.
That was kind of a weird drive-by in Chicago. I apologize.
No, that makes
a city full of beautiful people. As a Philadelphian, I can say that. But she fits. And so I was curious about the thinking behind 6, where suddenly you've brought in this rogues gallery of brilliant performers, some of whom are like Twitter faves, or just like people who we have deep connections to and feel a certain way about. The decision to do that and whether it would disrupt anything, and then also, I think you've already begun to say what that was like when you were actually rolling on them.
Well, it's interesting because we wanted it. First of all, that episode was so fun because when you write something, or when, Joe and I wrote that together, and obviously it's like very deeply personal of some shit that we had seen. And I think a lot of people have seen when you just have a holiday dinner that just goes to shit and everyone's trying too hard and there's probably some substance abuse and some mental illness. But as gnarly as it gets, there's also stupid shit happening everywhere. Like, something can be really particularly disgusting in one room and then silly in the other.
Yeah.
And I think when we were putting that together, we really wanted it to feel disorientating and disruptive and distracting. The way that you walk into a holiday party, and you're sort of like, who the fuck is that? Like, what's that person doing? Like, what is going on? Like, why is Bob Odenkirk? Why is Jamie Lee Curtis here? Like, what's going on? But then as you settle into it, you're sort of like, oh, these are all heavy hitters throwing fastballs at each other.
Yeah.
And I think for me, selfishly, it was also this chance to be like, okay, we have to remember all these people, not too dissimilar from Bernthal in season 1, where these people are a weight on Carmi or in some cases like the savior to them. So when I look at somebody like Sarah Paulson, who I think is one of the greatest actors working today, that she came in and did that for us, and she was sort of this person that to give a piece of advice to Jeremy, like that makes as much sense to me as like Jamie Lee just being a fucking animal.
Because they need to be outsized, not just in terms of casting, but outsized in terms of the
100%.
shadow they cast.
Like
on
this
our
is someone that they loom over Jeremy every day. And
It's so crazy. The Stevie and Michelle characters were like, I remember when I was like in 4th or 5th grade, but like my grandfather died, and my aunt came to the funeral from LA with this dude who was her boyfriend, and he like immediately the first day took me out and bought me a skateboard. And that's the only thing I remember about my grandfather's like entire thing. Like was like this guy who was like the coolest motherfucker ever bought me a Veriflex when I was like 9 years old. And like that's Michelle and Stevie. Like they're the people from out of town who are just like, we got out of here. And they're like a little cool, and their words carry so much weight because they've got this experience outside of this nest,
100%. But also it's like exactly what you said. Like you're anticipating this guy to be a fucking dick, and he brings a skateboard. You're like, oh, he's all right. And I think like when the other thing that we like to do on our show a lot is sort of like, or just in general, I should say, is like there is a little bit of a reversal to it, like where you're like, I think Mulaney is so fucking good on that episode.
He's incredible.
And like, and I think like people just hadn't seen him do that yet. And I think when you really look at it, you're like, well, he's one of our greatest storytellers. Like, why wouldn't he be good in this scenario, having to make a speech? But also at the same time, you're like, I haven't seen JLC go fucking batshit crazy like that. Like I haven't seen sort of like Gillian do that with Eben. Like I haven't seen a lot of the people in this. Like, by the way, Ricky Stafiri, who's one of our best friends and was our assistant on season 1, plays Ted Fack and fucking rules. And like his first, I mean, like it was so great because he's like, dude, my first scene, I'm in between Odenkirk and Bernthal. Yeah. And like and it was so funny because I think the first thing we shot, one of the first things we shot of this episode was like Paulson hanging with the facts. Mm-hmm. And I think for a second she's like, what in the fuck is happening? And like dove right in, and it was the best.
How do you balance with so many, I want to say like just talented actors. I want to say big actors, but I didn't mean that in a pejorative way.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But as a director, you are kind of a chef in this moment because you have to calibrate the ingredients to taste. Yeah. So what is the tone that you're striking on set to make sure that while they go big, this is a holiday dinner, people are high, they're drunk, they're angry, they stay within the bounds of the meal you're trying to serve.
Well, it was interesting too, because when we wrote the script, I think the script is like 35 pages, and I think the end of the episode's about 105. And that's like a hard thing too, because I hate when I don't, sometimes shows go too long, but I think like on this one we kind of earned it a little bit, and it didn't feel boring to us. And I know we go a little bit above 30 a few times this season, but in the thinking about it, like the way I think we love to run our sets is like, here's sort of the script, but like, let's add or subtract, and like, let's kind of end here. And I think the biggest bonus of having actors like that, dude, because I know some people were like, were you scared? And you're like, no, dude, you're like pumped, because you're like, you know that this is going to get fucking crazy. Like, and it's like, as we were shooting that, and like Bob's the best, dude. And I think like when we were shooting that scene at the table, there was just like one of my favorite moments of shooting anything. I think we had done 2 takes that was just sort of the fork throwing kind of starting to build up and everyone getting tense. And I think like Bernthal knew that we usually do about 3. And so in between 2 and 3, he like walked up and he was like, boss, I'm gonna throw this fucking table. I was like, throw that table, my dude. So like, but it was great. And I also think like that episode in particular was great because, you know, Io wasn't in it. So she served as she produced that episode with us, and she was on set with me at the monitor with me and Joanna. And, you know, Io is going to be like probably one of our finest filmmakers. She's just so sharp.
She's already one of our preeminent Letterboxd users.
Yeah, I mean, dude, she's smart in a way that's kind of,
her reviews are great. Like,
but I mean, she just is so literate and sharp at all times that I think like having her at the monitor, like she was the person that was like rein this in a little bit, or you know, or Joe or anyone or Josh Senior would chime in and sort of be like, let's take this down a notch. But I think the benefit of having all those people was it was going to get out of fucking control. Like, so many things weren't scripted. Like when Sarah looks at Jamie Lee and is like, not really.
Oh shit.
That like, fuck you explosion was really incredible, because at the same time, like I know our core cast is so, like, I think it should also go without saying that like Abby's sort of the MVP of the season, sneaky. And I think like that performance of that episode is sort of grounds everything. Like that last shot we see of her is, because like, there was a take where she was crying, and it was like, there was something better about the exhaustion sort of being at the end of all this crazy shit. And again, going back to the unlocking thing, like they all worked so well together, man. Like, because I think you were also saying like when you get more known people, maybe this shit hits the fan, or, you know, maybe someone's a dick or something, you know, but everyone was the best.
But also there's an act of faith to it too. I'm glad you mentioned Abby, because, you know, she was an important part of the ensemble in season 1, but you know, she didn't have her own arc, or we didn't understand how she fit in. And there is an enormous act of faith. And you know, I overdo the show as the metaphor for the creative process. Sure. But when Carmy gives Tina his knife, I mean, you could go one of 2 ways. You could just run away from something that's an unknown. Can Abby carry those moments? Can she do these scenes? Can she be the integral part of the cast? Or you trust the people you hired, the people you've come to know, right? And it seems like that was enormously rewarding for everyone.
Of course, man. And also I think it's like, it goes back to that like the generosity of everybody. Like the cast is so kind to each other and really wants everyone to succeed. And I think like a lot of the most alive moments, I think that's what I should have said. Like, we're always chasing things that feel like really, really alive. Like one of my favorite moments of a movie semi-recently is in American Hustle. This is like such a bizarre reference to make, but like there is a moment in American Hustle where Bradley Cooper thinks he's won and does an impression of Louis C.K., gets a laugh, and then does it again. Which, like, whatever you think of that movie is like truly one of the fucking greatest things ever, because you know that was improv and you know that he was set up to sort of create that moment. And I think like that spirit really is what we were sort of chasing in episode 6, because as you said, Andy, like everything else is so sort of locked down the rest of the season. Like this is where we could sort of fully be out of control.
I was wondering for 6 specifically, but in general, how much of the filmmaking do you think we should be viewing? I mean, you wouldn't do prescriptive stuff for an audience, but how much of 6, for instance, is like Carmy's memory, and like the filmmaking kind of is reflecting, this is this pivotal moment in this guy's life. This is why he needs to make this cannoli or can't make this cannoli, but also like it's an inflection point. He goes away again after this. Everything changes. and so that the way the performances are calibrated, but specifically the filmmaking is. He's not in every scene,
right?
But I almost watched that episode. I'm like, this is this guy's memory of this night to some extent.
Yeah, 100%.
And how much does that impact? Like, so even when he meets Claire in the deli or the bodega or whatever, and it's like that is like the fucking most romantic thing you've ever seen. It's just this frosted freezer window, and it's like the idea that you're shooting kind of to reflect the interiority of these characters.
100%. I also think it's like, chefs talk a lot about sense memory. So that episode really is, it's all noise. And then in the middle of it, it's sort of shot like The Bear. It's sort of shot like you remember first season, but Claire and Carm at the fridge, we framed and shot that the same way that Jamie Lee and Carm are at the fridge, the same way that we shot Carm and Bernthal in the, so these things reverberate. And also, like, I think if you remember in season 2 or in episode 2, there's a moment where they have to like cut a lock only for Carmy to be locked away at the end. Like, there are these things about getting locked in these memories and being, like I said before, like there's flight, fright, and then freeze, which is like a really hard thing to talk about, but also like visualize. And so I think when Carm looks back on that, like we also colored it differently. Like it's much grainier. It's as close to 30. Like we wanted to shoot 35, and we ran into some production. Yeah. Well, we just couldn't. I don't think we could have been able to move.
Succession had used all the 35 millimeter.
Yeah. Well,
film
also
left.
The whole budget got blown on Olivia Colman's flight.
No, we were also just like, the schedule was so fast that we were like, we got to keep rocking.
They're like, you can have Weird Science, or you can have 35 millimeter.
Literally, you can have Strange Currencies 3 times, or this. But we also like, I think one of the things we figured out about the show is that we normally shoot really long takes. So we'll just roll for 12 minutes and have people sort of come in and out of the scene. And, that first scene in 6 where they're all in the kitchen was truly like the funnest thing. Because you're like, okay, Gil, you come in here. Eben, like, go tickle Jamie Lee, let her fall. Like, and it started to feel alive and sort of scary in the way that memories can feel sort of alive and scary, and also faded a little bit.
I think you're in a safe space when it comes to episode 7, Forks, because I think we both think it's a masterpiece.
Oh, that's nice,
we love it, and particularly coming after 6, the economy of it is really bracing and exciting, and there's just clearly you give a lot of thought to how you course out the season. But I did want to use 7 as an opportunity to get your thoughts on one criticism that I have heard about the season. I don't share it. I actually think it's a feature, not a bug, but that there's a fantasy element here. Yeah. That Richie, the Richie we meet in season 1, could he become a world-class 3-star Michelin maitre d' after a week? Yeah. Is he uniquely special to have this opportunity granted to him and to deliver in that moment? And I feel like that's something you must have considered in the storytelling. Totally. And I'm wondering what your perspective on that is.
It's interesting because a lot of that episode was sort of inspired by some of my friends that do this, that run 3-star Michelin restaurants. And like Nick Kokonis at Alinea was really great to us and let us watch Expo. And particularly my friend Will Gadara wrote a book about hospitality, and he wrote...
Richie's reading that.
Which Richie is reading, but and he also ran 11 Madison, was a co-owner of 11 Madison Park. And because, some people are like, well, that was so quick. And it's like, well, I don't know how long excitement, passion takes. Like, who knows? Like, by the way, Richie could fall on his ass in season 3. But I think the thing that I wanted to capture was, man, when you're inspired, whether it's by a job or a girl or something happening in your life, dude, like, it's the best. Especially with someone who's been struggling with purpose, and especially someone who's like, this shit is so stupid, only to find that like, oh, I kind of understand it. Like, I kind of am into this. Like, taking care of people is like a beautiful thing. Because again, like, we don't know what happens in season 3. Like, we don't know if it pans out for him, if he ends up loving it. But I do think when you are inspired in the right way, something clicks. And I think like the every second counts really means something to a guy like Richie.
Well, I also just think fundamentally, like, the core tenet of your show is that it's very big-hearted. Yeah. It is not ironic. It is not, there's no distance. And I think that's underappreciated, and I think it's one of the reasons why people respond to it to such a degree. And you can see it in in a character arc like the one we're describing, but I think you can also see it, and we've talked about this a lot with the needle drops.
Sure.
When you put Let Down in season 1, I
totally.
was like, these motherfuckers. Like, you don't actually use the best song. You have to like hide behind it, and you put the obscure track on the mixtape to impress someone. You don't use the one that will actually bring the house down.
Totally.
You guys always choose the song that is the biggest, purest expression of what people might be feeling or thinking or wanting to listen to.
Well, it's your show. You should answer the question.
No, but it's great because I think it's also like, Josh and I do the music, and we work with a clearance person. It's great. And we sort of have really found like the turnaround again back to process is so fast that I think every season we sort of be like, all right, here's some music that we were feeling previously, and particularly driving around listening to XRT and radio station XRT in Chicago that I love, which sort of just plays anything and everything. But it sort of also is in the place where you're like, if I was just going on what this station played, I wouldn't know what decade it was.
Yeah, right.
And I think by having all these needle drops from all over the place, it does feel a little timeless and a little dad rocky and a little like sort of lost somewhere.
Yeah.
If you were worried about losing us in season 2, you could do worse than putting the replacements in it. We're back.
Yeah.
We're
well,
in.
I also think it's like, I'm never like, check out my musical knowledge, man. Like,
No, it's just good.
Well, it's just like, this is shit that we love listening
I did
to.
not know that Harmonia song though, the Bridito one. That was fucking incredible.
Dude, it's awesome.
Yeah.
The song's great. Well, also it's interesting too because we have sort of found that Josh and I sort of taking on like the supervisor role just because of time. Like literally, like we're moving so fast that it's like it just sort of became a necessity. We did find that it was something cool about connecting with the actual bands because we would be like, no, we're going to play the whole song for 3 minutes. And they were like, oh, that's kind of cool and different.
Yeah.
And we made a lot of great friendships that way.
This is sort of a sidetrack question, but do you think White Squall is in Richie's like Ridley Scott Mount Rushmore?
100%.
Yeah.
Also, it's really hard to see. There is an annotated copy of the movie novelization of Black Rain on his
Holy
nightstand.
shit.
Yeah, it's deep.
So he's a real one.
He's a real one.
Yeah.
He's a real one. And even like his bookcase, which you can't really see, there's like the making of Blade Runner. Like, there's a lot. How
there. Deep does it go? Like is he Kingdom of Heaven director's cut?
Kingdom of Heaven director's cut.
Yeah.
I think he's like someone to watch over me town.
Yeah.
Like he's seen all. What's funny? My
Berenger naked.
Well, what's so funny? My friend Max texted me. It was sort of like White Squall. That's all I said. And I was like, it's the highest praise.
I think we got to get Richie in. We got to get Eben in character on the Big Picture podcast.
Yeah.
I feel like that would be his best.
It's well, you know what? It's also
self.
like going back to Chris Zucchero, who's my lifelong, like the first friend I ever made, whose family owned Mr. Beef. Like they were always his father, who passed away while we were making the show, was always so wonderful to my sister and I, and let us hang out there and work there. And they had such an encyclopedic knowledge of hyper specific filmmakers. Like Chris can talk about William Friedkin all day, and Michael Mann, and the spirit of that definitely made its way into some of Richie.
I think one of the most remarkable accomplishments of The Bear across 2 seasons is chefs like it and chefs respect it. We talk a lot about how, if we watch a show about detectives or the military, we're like, well, that's accurate.
Yeah.
And we're responding to the truth.
Yeah, we know what that's like.
We don't know at all. But if we saw a show about, music journalists or podcasters or whatever, we'd be like, okay, now let's pump the brakes.
I actually did that with an episode of And Just Like That recently. I was like watching it and there's like a podcast part and I was like, that's not actually how the advertising industry works.
But also they were like preparing for the podcast ahead of time and you're like, I'm going to call bullshit on
that.
Yeah. But so that is kind of a magic trick because even we were talking before about our mutual friend Daniel who
DP.
could nitpick specific things, but understands that the large project is true. How do you feel like you and your team were able to accomplish this?
Honestly, man, I think it's because, and again, there's plenty of people that like,
oh, I'm sure.
Oh man, I get hit every day. I'm like, oh, I can't look at fucking DMs. Like they're all just like, you fucking suck.
Yeah. You didn't let that fucking T-bone rest.
Dude, yeah, dude, everybody nuts. But also I do think it's because, look, there's all kinds of shit we get wrong and production is hard. Like you're like, people point out like, that's not Lakeshore, that's not the Edens. You're like, yeah, I know. We had 2 hours, we had 2 hours to get the shot and it was either that or nothing or whatever it is, But I think like, in terms of like the actual chef stuff, I think we always wanted to shoot for like 50% accuracy. And I think the reason I say that is because like, look, the kitchen's gigantic because you have to fit a camera in. Mm-hmm. You have to fit sound people. Like a lot of the kitchen is much more generous than any of these chefs and restaurateurs can deal with. But I do think there's something about it that shows its heart was in the right place. And like we did try, and so many of our friends and family were really amazing to us, and like particularly Courtney and Maddie and their outreach. But like, you say DP, Daniel Patterson, who is the chef of Qua and is sort of one of these genius level cooks. I spent a lot of time following him and Roy Choi around when they were going to open local, and watching the way they work together was like really incredible and not dissimilar from the way Carmi and Sid do. So even if like we're not getting everything right, I do think the spirit of chasing that, like, dude, there was a day that we were at some weird, like someone was hosting a benefit at their home in New York and sort of hired like every incredible chef in New York to come visit. And I found myself watching Roy Choi, Daniel Patterson, and Renee Redzepi like taste test a chicken nugget that they were working on. And the three of them pushing each other and like taking it very seriously was like truly one of the most inspiring things, because I was like, oh man, those are like three guys with three completely different backgrounds, all sort of chasing this thing. And I think that really stuck with me, the spirit of that. So I think we're definitely very grateful that the restaurant community accepted us, but I also think it's like so much of it is due to, my sister and Maddie and people like Daniel in my life.
Is there a little bit of a magic trick that has to happen with the food, to the extent that we're told Carmi is this kind of like one of one? Luca says as much pretty much, when he's talking to Lionel. And then like, as the season goes on and we hear about Chaos Menu, we see glimpses of the menu here and there where individual dishes will start to get tweaked or whatever. But we've talked a lot in discussing the episode where it's almost like the reverse that thing you do problem. Like that thing you do can just play the song over and over again, and they got the right song and you're just like, that would be a hit. That's right. But for Carmi's cooking, especially since food is so subjective, people have such wildly different tastes. Do you have to kind of keep it a little bit obscured what it is? Like what he's
100%.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like, look, if we're lucky enough to get a season 3, I think we get into that much more. Yeah. But I think the thing that I found being around a lot of chefs too is that like the food is almost like secondary. Like when you're building a restaurant,
well, that's because when you showed the menu on the wall, I was like, yeah, it's like a menu.
Yeah,
that's like food.
Well, I mean, it is interesting because like truly watching, like people like in a 3-star Michelin restaurant, they're changing their menu every day, and they do it at the end of the night, usually based on what they have or sort of what the routine is inside that restaurant. And what I've observed, and I think when you're building a restaurant, it's sort of like what you said about like people liking season 1 and then going to season 2. It's like you can't even let any of that shit in because you have to build another restaurant. So it's like you trust yourself that the food will be okay as long as the foundation is there for it.
Also, the majority of people, the majority of meals, you don't really remember the food that much past it. You remember maybe a dish or two or a taste, but you remember the night. And you remember the company, and you remember the service and the atmosphere and everything else that went around it. And I feel like that's a similar ratio that you guys bring to the show, where the human stories and their emotional arcs and their journeys, that's what we're watching. And the food is just night to night, we're going to see it. And that's the language that they're using to communicate.
Yeah. I also think we found in the making of it, like, again, because how we do the food is like my sister is essentially running a restaurant within the show, which is pretty incredible to see. And she works with Laura Roper, our props department. It's like, it is wild that they're building like a full-scale restaurant to sort of accommodate all the food stuff. And I think the thing we've realized is you can go so into the weeds with the food stuff too. So it's like, it is a choice to be like, all right, Carmi's good at this. Like Sydney's good at this. We'll figure it out, and we'll get into it later.
We were going to ask this, and we almost forgot to, which is, so Maddie Matheson, cook, internet personality, larger than life personality, a friend of yours, but also he's a really good actor.
He's tremendous.
How did that? I mean, things can happen, but like there's something of the way you shot it or the positions that you put him in, and then who he is, where he's just holding the screen and present in these scenes with Oliver Platt, who's doing God tier work, and it's just like,
oh man, Platt rules. Well, no, Maddie. I mean, the thing that's interesting is like, I love, he's one of my best friends and I love him so much. And I think it kind of goes back to he feels really safe around the cast and the crew, and everyone's looking out for him. Particularly like Ebby is like his acting coach. Yeah. Like him and Evan really spend a lot of time together. And I think like going back to the unlocking thing, like him and Ricky unlock something in each other. And it was so funny because when we were sitting, Duccio Fabri, our AD, and I were like, before we shot 206, we had to like lay out a chart and sort of walk through where everyone was sitting and where the special effects were going to happen, all that shit. And I remember when we showed Maddie's like, got it, between Bernthal and Odenkirk, fuck you. Like, he's like, okay, got it. Everyone's throwing fucking heat. And okay, cool.
So you alluded to it, Christy. If you're lucky enough to get a season 3, you can't say anything. We feel strongly that you will get a season 3. Not to break news to you, but we feel pretty good about it.
Knocking on wood, man.
It'll just be part of the larger MCU, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's like Julia Louis-Dreyfus has owned the rest.
I mean, we got the Punisher, and we got, I think, Io's in the Marvel world. So
that's true.
Like,
the longer this goes, they'll all be eventually.
Yeah.
You don't have a Jedi though. I know spoilers to Andor, but Evan has a different arc. This writer's strike, which is going on now, obviously is going to affect whatever planning or pre-production and writing you have for the season. Where are you with a potential season 3 right now? Just sort of a broad question. We don't want spoilers. I'm just curious where your head is at, because last year you were probably at this point.
Yeah, you were probably
you were already into it in season 2.
Well, what I have like no concept of time anymore. I truly, because I think the turnaround of the show, like even on this season, I think we made it by the skin of our teeth. Like, but right before this, like minutes before this, and I don't think anyone, there was like a week where it's like the strike might happen or it might not happen, and we were like, we should probably boogie, dude. So we cut this in a like reckless amount of time, and I think, I hope this strike is over soon and everyone gets treated fairly and we can move on. But I think in terms of season 3, we have the map we sort of know where it's going, so we're lucky in that. I mean, again, it's like, working with FX was pretty great. That was sort of from the jump, we knew where it was headed.
I almost wonder whether or not I was curious whether or not like any of this delay or whatever it would be, like it would inform the story at all, because there's so much compression for the first 2 seasons and so much intensity, and then there's like this weird breath, and
season 3 picks up 4 years later and they're doing fast casual.
Like
a lot of grain bowls for lunch crowd.
I can promise no time jumps, but I do think it's that thing of kind of what I was saying earlier, where we have incredible writers, and I think I think everyone kind of knows that we always leave room for sort of the unexpected, and I think that's what we did this year. But yeah, I mean, again, the show is so insanely fast that a break might be kind of nice, but it's a good problem to have if we have to do.
Your next project, you got to go full Terrence Malick and just shoot it for like 6 years and just like go off and shoot a leaf.
Yeah, I was like, I know we made our show, in 2 months, pretty start to finish. So let's take a couple of years and really.
You could try. What was that word you said? Fun.
Oh yeah. Well, what's interesting though, dude? I do know that everyone kind of gets worried about shows disappearing for a while, and that's something we think a lot about. But I don't know, if we're lucky to do it again, I think we got a good handle on it.
Good.
And we didn't even talk to you about this Don Winslow thing.
Oh yeah.
Oh man,
you're going to adapt this great Don Winslow novel.
So if that happens, I by the way, I'm like, I don't believe anything until I come on set. Koppelman and Levine, man, they wrote this script. It's one of the best things I've ever read. Yeah. And it's also like, it's got a little bit of a history of people trying to figure it out. And I think if we could do it, it would be special. And
that's exciting.
But we'll see what happens.
It's about to be like Don Winslow season 2, right? Because they like City on Fire is getting made.
I heard somebody's making City on Fire.
I thought you meant because of the election next year.
Oh yeah,
that's what I call election season.
Or
season.
Carmy just goes full Frankie Machine in season 3.
Yeah,
yeah.
Just bring them all together. Dude, thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for the show.
Awesome.
We're
you guys are the coolest. It means a lot.